Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you thought you knew, someone deeply intuitive and empathetic, and felt a sudden, chilling sense of emptiness? It's as if they are physically present, nodding and responding, but the soul of the connection has already vacated the building. This is the silent exit, and it is one of the most misunderstood experiences in human psychology. Most people mistake this distance for a bad mood, a stressful week, or a temporary bout of playing hard to get. They assume that because there hasn't been a loud argument or a dramatic door slam, the relationship is still intact. But with an empath, the loudest part of their departure is the silence that precedes it. They don't detach on a whim or walk away because they got their feelings hurt in a single afternoon. Instead, they follow a sophisticated internal psychological sequence that operates like a background program on a computer. By the time you notice the symptoms of their withdrawal, the program has already finished its task. You aren't losing them to a fleeting emotion, you are losing them to a cumulative realization. The exit was finalized in their mind weeks or perhaps months before they actually physically disappeared. This process is so jarring because it lacks the typical warning shots of a standard relationship breakdown. In most dynamics, people fight, they scream, they demand change, and they use their anger as a tool to seek repair. An empath, however, views the world through a lens of precision over reaction. This is the fundamental truth that most people miss. An empath isn't slow to react because they are confused or weak. They are slow to conclude because they are thorough. They aren't interested in the isolated event of you forgetting a promise or snapping at them in a moment of stress. While you are focused on defending your actions in the here and now, the empath is zooming out. They are looking at the arc of your character. They don't see your behavior as a series of random moments. They see them as data points on a graph. To them, every interaction is a measurement of alignment. They are constantly weighing the words coming out of your mouth against the energetic frequency of your actual intentions. When those two things don't match, when you say you care but act with indifference, or when you claim honesty but project secrecy, they don't feel the need to point it out. Why would they? They simply observe. As this observation continues, the empath begins building a comprehensive psychological profile of the relationship, layer by layer, interaction by interaction. They are essentially a scientist in the lab of your connection, and they are looking for one thing: consistency. They are trying to determine if your toxic behavior is a temporary glitch caused by external circumstances, or if it is the operating system of your personality. While they are doing this, they may appear remarkably calm, even-tempered, and accepting. You might think you're getting away with something because they aren't calling you out. In reality, they are giving you the space to show them exactly who you are without interference. They are asking one silent, devastating question in the back of their mind. Is this a mistake I can help you fix? Or is this the pattern of who you are? Once they decide it's a pattern, the data is locked in. The conclusion is reached. And once an empath reaches a conclusion, the emotional energy they once used to sustain the bridge between you is instantly redirected inward to protect themselves. They don't need to argue with the data because the data doesn't lie. They simply stop investing in a structure that they now know is destined to collapse. The pattern recognition threshold is the invisible line that, once crossed, changes the chemistry of a relationship forever. Think of it as a point of no return for the empath's internal gatekeeper. Before they reach this threshold, the empath is working overtime for you. They are in the interpretation phase, where they are actively trying to bridge the gap between who you say you are and how you actually behave. During this time, they are your biggest advocate and your most patient student. If you are inconsistent, they look for external reasons to explain it: stress at work, a difficult childhood, or a simple misunderstanding. They are essentially making excuses on your behalf because they want the connection to work. They are still in the game, which means they are still emotionally vulnerable, still reactive, and still hoping for a breakthrough. At this stage, they might still argue with you or express hurt because they believe that if they just explain it correctly, you'll finally see the light and change. But then the data stabilizes. The empath reaches the threshold where your behavior is no longer a series of isolated accidents, but a predictable, repeatable cycle. This is the moment the pattern becomes visible in its entirety. Suddenly, the fog of confusion lifts, and the empath stops asking, "Why is this happening?" and starts stating, "This is just how they work." This shift from personal to structural is the death knell of the connection. When your actions become predictable, they stop being personal attacks and start being structural defects. It's like realizing a chair has a broken leg. You don't get angry at the chair for being broken. You simply stop sitting in it. The empath stops viewing you as a complex human being to be deeply understood and starts viewing you as a system to be managed or avoided. They no longer take your letdowns personally because they now expect them. This is the exact moment where the emotional investment dies, and it is usually the quietest moment in the entire relationship. Most people expect a final straw to be a massive explosion or a dramatic confrontation. But for an empath, the final straw is often a moment of absolute cold clarity. When they see the pattern, they lose the benefit of the doubt that fueled their attachment. You might notice that they stop complaining about your behavior or stop trying to fix the dynamic. This isn't because they finally accepted your flaws. It's because they've detached from the outcome. They have realized that your inconsistency is actually your most consistent trait. Because uncertainty creates a desperate kind of attachment, the arrival of total clarity creates an immediate, cooling distance. Once this threshold is crossed, the empath's internal system shifts into self-protection mode. They move from a state of emotional vulnerability to one of clinical observation. They are no longer interpreting your words, they are simply watching your actions play out like a movie they've already seen a dozen times. This is why you cannot win an empath back once they have reached this stage. You can't use the old emotional triggers to pull them back in, because those triggers only work when there is still a shred of hope or confusion. Without confusion, there is no leverage. The clarity they've gained acts as a shield. They see your attempts at manipulation or your sudden bursts of kindness as just another part of the predictable cycle. They aren't being cold, they are being realistic. They have simply realized that the cost of maintaining the connection is higher than the value it provides, and their nervous system has made the executive decision to stop paying the price. The moment an empath begins to withdraw isn't a random choice. It is a biological necessity. Their internal system operates on a highly sensitive frequency, and when that frequency is disrupted by specific toxic shifts, a shutdown becomes inevitable. The first of these is emotional inconsistency, which is far more damaging to an empath than an outright argument. You see, an empath can handle a conflict. They can navigate a disagreement because a fight is at least honest, but they cannot survive unpredictability. When your emotional state, your level of attention, or your vibe keeps shifting without any clear reason, you are forcing the empath into a state of permanent high alert. Their nervous system begins to treat your presence like a radar screen that keeps flickering, They have to constantly scan you just to feel safe. This sustained state of internal monitoring is mentally and physically draining. Eventually, the empath's brain realizes that the weather of your personality is too unstable to build a life on. To save themselves from total burnout, they simply stop checking the radar. They choose the cold stability of distance over the chaotic heat of your inconsistency. The second trigger is the weight of unreciprocated depth. Empaths don't just like people, they invest in them. They see your potential, your wounds, and your hidden layers, and they pour their energy into holding space for all of it. However, they are also acutely aware of the energetic scales of a connection. When they realize that they are the only ones doing the heavy lifting, the only ones asking the deep questions, the only ones offering emotional safety, and the only ones seeking true intimacy, their system begins to detect a leak. They feel their life force being sucked into a void that gives nothing back. This isn't an ego-based decision or demand for tit-for-tat attention. It is a survival recalibration. An empath's heart is like a reservoir, and if you keep taking water without letting any rain fall back into it, the reservoir will eventually run dry. To prevent total depletion, the empath's internal system automatically shuts the valves. What was once freely given becomes selectively shared, and what was once a deep well becomes a shallow puddle. They aren't trying to punish you. They are simply stopping the leak before they have nothing left for themselves. The final and most definitive trigger is the energetic drain. This is the point where the connection moves from being an emotional issue to a biological one. For an empath, every interaction has a cost and a reward. In a healthy relationship, the exchange is balanced. You might give energy, but you receive inspiration, peace, or joy in return. But in a failing dynamic, the cost of interacting with you starts to exceed the reward every single time. Their body begins to flag your very name on their phone, or your presence in the room as a threat to their equilibrium. You might notice them becoming physically tired when you speak, or perhaps they seem foggy and distracted. This is because their nervous system has officially labeled the connection as non-viable. Their biology has decided that the exchange is no longer worth the investment of their limited energy. Once the body makes this call, there is no amount of talking it out that can fix it. The empath isn't just choosing to leave, their system is forcing them to exit. It's a biological regulation meant to protect their core. When an empath hits this stage, they are no longer reacting to your behavior. They are responding to their own body's desperate cry for balance. When an empath decides to walk away, they don't do it with a bang. They do it with a slow, methodical fading that is almost impossible to detect until it is finished. Most people expect a breakup to be a singular, explosive event filled with tears and accusations. But for an empath, the physical exit is just the final formality of a process that has been happening in the shadows for a long time. This is the detachment sequence, a three-stage cooling process designed to protect their inner world while they navigate the reality of a dying connection. It is a transition from deep, soul-level intimacy to a state of absolute neutrality. Because empaths feel everything so intensely, they cannot just stop caring overnight. Instead, they have to systematically dismantle the connection, piece by piece, starting from the inside out. By the time they actually leave the room, they have already left the relationship. The first phase is stage 1, emotional reduction. This is the subtle shift where the light in the connection begins to dim. On the surface, things might look relatively normal. You're still talking, still eating dinner together, still existing in the same space. But the internal transparency has been cut off. The empath has stopped sharing what actually matters to them. They no longer tell you about their private dreams, their fleeting fears, or the small things that move them during the day. They have moved from being an open book to being a closed vault. The conversations become polite, pleasant, and entirely superficial. They are essentially gray rocking you without even realizing it. They are still physically present, but the emotional access you once enjoyed has been restricted. They are no longer checking in on your emotional state, not because they are being mean, but because they have begun the process of reclaiming the energy they used to spend on you. The intimacy is gone, replaced by a measured, controlled courtesy. Next comes stage 2, cognitive detachment. And this is where the connection truly begins to dissolve. During the peak of a relationship, an empath invests a massive amount of mental energy into the other person. They think about you. They wonder how you're feeling. They replay your conversations in their head, and they analyze the why behind your actions. But in this stage, you simply stop occupying their mental space. The mental loop of you finally breaks. Where there was once constant reflection and concern, there is now a strange, quiet neutrality. They no longer stay up late wondering why you said what you said or how they can make things better. The need to understand you has completely evaporated. To an empath, this is a massive relief. It's the sound of their mind finally going quiet. They haven't just stopped caring about your feelings. They've stopped thinking about your existence in any deep way. You have moved from being a quote-unquote central character in their life to being quote-unquote background noise. Finally, the sequence concludes with stage 3, behavioral distance. This is the only stage that most people actually notice, but it's actually just the outward manifestation of a change that happened weeks ago. Now the outside finally matches the inside. Their responses become functional, short, and purely transactional. If you text them, you get a one-word answer. If you ask to hang out, they are suddenly busy with no alternative date offered. Their emotional tone flattens out entirely. They aren't angry, they aren't seeking revenge, and they aren't trying to hurt you. They are simply finished. There is no heat left for an argument, and there is no energy left for an explanation. This is the stage where the connection becomes optional rather than intentional. They have completed their internal restructuring, and they no longer require anything from you, not even closure. When you see an empath in this stage, you are looking at someone who has already crossed the finish line. They didn't just leave, they have evolved past the version of themselves that ever needed you. The reason an empath's exit feels so final, so cold, and so permanent is because of a phenomenon called the identity shift. You have to understand that for an empath to stay in a dysfunctional or draining relationship, they actually have to betray themselves. They have to suppress their intuition, shrink their boundaries, and overextend their emotional capacity just to keep the connection on life support. They become a version of themselves that is constantly explaining, constantly fixing, and constantly compromising their own peace for the sake of harmony. They are essentially living in a diminished state, playing a role that requires them to be smaller, quieter, and more tolerant than they actually are. When an empath finally detaches, they aren't just walking away from you, they are staging a prison break from the person they had to become to stay with you. They are shedding a skin that was too tight and a mask that was too heavy. This is why trying again is almost always impossible. When an empath leaves, they undergo a fundamental internal restructuring. They look back at the version of themselves that begged for your attention or stayed up late crying over your inconsistency, and they no longer recognize that person. That version of them has been retired. They have reclaimed the energy they used to spend on you and redistributed it back into their own growth, their own boundaries, and their own self-respect. To return to the relationship would require them to shrink back down into that smaller, wounded identity, and their soul simply won't allow it. It's not about ego, it's not about holding a grudge, and it's not about trying to win the breakup. It's about identity consistency. Once you have grown, you cannot pretend you are still small. Once you have seen the light, you cannot pretend you are still comfortable in the dark. Most people realize too late that the empath didn't just walk out the door. They outgrew the entire building. They have reached a level of clarity that cannot be unseen and a level of self-preservation that cannot be undone. Returning to you would be like trying to fit back into clothes they wore as a child. It's physically and emotionally impossible. The separation is final because the person you knew no longer exists. They have moved beyond the version of reality where your dynamic still made sense. They didn't just find a new path, they became a new person. When an empath reaches this stage of the rebirth, they are untouchable. They are no longer dependent on your validation or affected by your triggers because they have anchored their worth internally. The exit is final because they have finally realized that their greatest connection isn't with you. It's with the version of themselves they almost lost while trying to love you. Ultimately, the departure of an empath is not an act of cruelty, but an act of completion. By the time they physically walk away, they have already traveled through the stages of observation, clarity, and internal restructuring. They didn't leave you because of one bad day or a single mistake. They left because they finally saw the architecture of the connection and realized it was built on a foundation that could no longer support their growth. Their absence is final because it isn't fueled by anger, which can eventually cool, but by resolution, which only grows stronger with time. They have reclaimed their energy, moved their focus inward, and outgrown the very space you once shared. You aren't just looking at the end of a relationship. You are witnessing a person choosing their own survival over a cycle that was designed to deplete them. If you are currently feeling that shift in a relationship, either as the one pulling away or the one being left behind, it is time to stop guessing and start understanding the psychological mechanics at play. The more you know about these silent systems, the more you can protect your own peace and navigate your connections with total clarity. Don't let yourself get caught in the cycle of confusion and delayed detachment ever again. Click the link in my bio to dive deeper into the hidden patterns of human behavior, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss a breakthrough. It's time to stop reacting to what's happening on the surface and start decoding what's happening underneath.